Martina has called the roll.
And Martina, if you can let Marine Conservation League in, that's actually Larry Minikis, please.
Certainly. Member Minikis will be rejoining as a panelist momentarily. And then Member Randolph, if you're okay, I'll go ahead and call roll. Okay.
Welcome, Larry.
Welcome, sir. Member Cole, absent. Member Chu.
He's here. I can see him.
Member Dilworth.
Here.
Member Minikis.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I'm signed into the MCL account when I should be signed into my own. My apologies.
Member McCauley.
I'm here.
Member Wara. Absent. Member Howard. Here. Member Suggs is actually absent, and Member Randolph.
Here. Okay, well, I think the first thing I need to do is read this. The public is welcome to address the Citizens Oversight Committee at this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to Government Code Section 5.4, I can't read all that. The committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matters that are not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. And if everyone will please silence your cell phones now, which is a reminder to me to do that. Martina, is there any public wishing to make a comment? Do we even have any public?
Let's see if there are any members of the public wishing to speak at this time. Please raise your hand. If you are joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to mute and unmute yourself. And I do not believe we have any hands for public comment.
Okay. So I think we then move into the executive officer's report.
Good evening, everybody, and I think I'll be pretty brief. Fire activity wise, I feel like we're in 2011. It's the last year that I remember having such a slow start to the fire season as we have this year, which is a blessing, right? And I've talked to a lot of firefighters who are super happy that it's been this slow because they were not looking forward to getting work like they have the last decade. And it literally is the last decade that they have been that hard. But while it's been encouraging that it hasn't been terribly busy, the Mckinney Fire really was a reminder that the fuel conditions, the fire conditions are still where we can have these explosive fires that outrun everything that we can throw at it, especially in trying to get people out of the way. And it'll be interesting to hear any after action reports about the fatalities from the evacuations or the citizens in the evacuations and notifications. And one thing about if you've spent any time in the Klamath River, that river drainage is just horrible for communications, whether it's cellular communications, VHF, radio communications. So getting the word out in that area is very, very difficult. So I'll be interested to hear what they learned from that. Looking at the fuel moistures and such throughout the state, much of the state is trending close to halfway between normal and historic lows. We are fortunate right now that we're just below our normal fuel moisture temperature. So it's not horrible news. I did have an opportunity to talk to the fire chief from Ventura County Fire last week. They haven't had measurable rain since January, and their live fuel moistures are in the 50-something% range, which we don't normally see till September, October. So they're a wind event or two away from having more devastating fires. Within the MWPA, I think you guys know the committees really have been quiet, which to me, that means everyone's got their nose down and doing work. And we do have a lot of member agencies getting a lot of great work done. We're one of the few agencies that we want to see money expended because that means we're getting work done. And I've been getting a lot of invoices coming through that we're approving for the work that's getting done. So I'm very encouraged by that. And then we had two significant positive thresholds just recently, and that is the NEPA compliance that we needed for projects that were in the federal lands has been completed. So we're going to be able to start moving forward on projects that overlaid federal lands. I know that's been a big emphasis for a lot of us, especially for the Southern Marin Zone and the West Marin Zone. So that's a huge step forward. And then the second positive step forward is that we did receive our Coastal Commission permit. We do have a 10-day filing period for an appeal. But so we'll see if an appeal occurs. But I think the stakeholder meetings that Ann has been conducting with all of our environmental partners and the feedback that we received following the permit hearing, I'm feeling comfortable that we're going to get through the appeals period. We'll see. And the last thing I have that I think is going to be of particular interest for you is regarding the annual report and how the MWPA will make adjustments to our practices and policies based on the recommendations you all provided in the annual report. And if you remember that through discussion with the executive committee, we broke the recommendations basically in 3 categories. One category, we've already made that adjustment. Another category is it has will have an impact on our member agencies. Therefore, we wanted to get member agency feedback and their recommendations on how to make those adjustments based on your recommendations. And then the third category was these are policy decisions that we need to work with the finance committee and then have the finance committee make a recommendation to the board of directors for these policy level decisions. And then you'll probably remember that several of the recommendations overlap 2 of those categories. One being the ATC or the member agency type feedback, and then the other being the policies. And so we would take feedback that we get from our member agencies, provide it into the policy adjustment policy amendment process, and then bring that to the finance committee. So Ann and I had the opportunity to meet with Chiefs Martin and White today, since they are the chairs of the Ops Committee and the Advisory Technical Committee. We discussed that process and identified a well-rounded task force that will be led by MWPA staff to absorb the recommendations from the COC and make recommended adjustments to our practices and policies. We made sure that we had representation of large agencies, small agencies. We have city managers, fire chiefs, personnel who work as the pre-fire engineers. And we also brought in a couple of members of the finance staff from our member agencies so they can provide that perspective. And our goal is to get this worked out. I estimate 2 meetings of 2 hours each to create the adjustments that we think we need. And then the deadline that we put forward on that is the end of October. And that's when staff will start working on policy adjustments and policy language to bring to the finance committee, with the deadline of having the finance committee review that by the end of December. So good movement forward in that regard. And with that, I'll take any questions.
John, I think your hand was up first.
Yeah, okay. Mark, would that be inclusive of anything we decide tonight with regards to the policies that we're kicking around here?
Potentially.
Okay.
While we're opening up the policies, there were already a few items that the finance committee had discussed adjusting prior to and after that were outside of what the recommendations of the annual report. And while you're in there adjusting policies, why limit yourself, right?
Thank you.
Larry or Lucy, I think you had your hand up first, even though your mechanical hand went up last.
I just was wondering at what point our annual report would be put up on the website, since it's now officially out there.
Martina and I will work offline to get that up there as soon as possible. I was wondering if you guys wanted to have the addendum about the audit to be included before we posted it online.
That makes sense.
Larry?
Yeah, this is on a different topic. I just wanted to check with you, Mark, to see if you have a general estimate in terms of when we can get our first round of financial information.
I'm working with Lisa hard that we'll be able to close out the books for 21, 22 in October. So that's what I'm looking. That's our target right now.
Okay. Do you have an auditor lined up yet?
Yeah, I don't know what the schedule is. Same auditor as last time. I'm not sure where we've lined up on their schedule yet, but I'll check with Elisa. I know that I know as we were closing out that audit, she was already pinging them to get on the schedule. So I just haven't gotten that information from them yet.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Martina, do we need to go out to the public for public comment?
Are we moving on to the next section of the agenda?
Do we need to have, well, I'm probably losing. Did you already ask for public comment on the executive officer's report?
Yes, but
Okay. I'm losing it then. So consent calendar. And you need to help me out here. Do we need to ask for public comment before we go to this consent calendar?
yeah, I'll go ahead. If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on any items in the consent calendar, please raise your hand. If you're joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. And it does not look like we have any comments, any public comments.
Okay, so consent calendar, I think that consists entirely of the minutes.
I'd make a motion that we approve the consent calendar.
Second that.
And I guess that requires a roll call.
Yogi, roll call for consent calendar. Member Cole is absent. Member Chu,
Aye.
Member Dillard,
Aye.
Member Minikis,
Aye.
Member McCauley,
Aye.
Member Wara, absent. Member Howard.
Yes. Aye.
Member Randolph,
Hi.
and then we have Member Suggs as absent.
Okay. So moving on to item 7, which is the report out on the committees. My name is there next to the executive committee, but I'm also going to do the board of directors because, as it turns out, John did not attend. And I think in the interest of time, because we have a pretty full agenda today on the executive committee, there was really nothing on that. That was one that went into executive sessions. So I have no idea what actually went on during most of the executive committee meeting. And the board of directors, there were a couple of minor things that might in the future be of interest to the committee, but they were very minor. So in the interest of time, I think we will move on beyond that unless anybody has some questions or comments. Okay. So moving on to information items. Does anyone have any information items?
And if I may, just out of matter of practice, we probably should ask about for
The public.
comment on this item.
We should ask Sophia if she has any questions.
Right.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on this next item, please raise your hand. If you're joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand on the phone and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. And we do not have any public comments yet.
Okay, now moving on to information items. Does anyone have any information items they wish to share with the group? Seeing no hands, I assume that means we can move on then to the action items. So the first action item, we'll let Larry Chu present just his statement on the audit now that the audit is out, and statement that we should append to our report. Larry?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you know, the audit only had one finding, and it was something that we had anticipated, back in June anyway, because of the size of this agency. We just don't have the size of staff in order to provide what they consider end-to-end controls on, the purchasing and requisition, all the way through to the payment of any thing that's, purchased or acquired by, the agency. The language is pretty basic. Had John review it with me, and had Mark also give it a look. Took the recommendation from this committee from the last time to change, one of the words, which was to acknowledge the receipt of the audit rather than, I can't remember, I think it was accept is what we used before. So other than that, unless you want me to read it into the record, I'll leave it up to the committee to ask any clarifying questions.
Questions? If John has no questions, then
I would move that we accept the report as written.
Second.
Do we need to ask for public comment?
I can certainly go ahead and take roll.
Public comment, then
All
you'll.
right, vote. Okay, so we'll go with Member Cole, who I believe is absent. I'm sorry, Mark, were you going to say something?
Public comment first.
Oh, I apologize. If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on this item, please press *9 to raise your hand if you are joining us by phone, or raise your hand in the reactions. If you're joining us by the phone, please press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. And we do not have any public comments at this time.
Now you may call the roll.
Okay, and we'll start with Member Cole, who is absent. Member Chu,
Aye.
Member Dilworth,
Aye.
Member Minnicus,
Aye.
Member McCauley,
Aye.
Member Wara is absent. Member Howard
Aye.
and Member Randolph.
Aye.
Thank you.
And I can, if that satisfies your guys' needs and the form that I have, the annual report, I could add that staff report as is, or a version of it as a last page as an addendum to the staff report without having to go back to the people that made that staff report. So we can handle it in-house if that fits your guys' needs.
Sounds excellent.
We'll take care of it.
Okay. So moving on to item 9B. And B and C really sort of work together, but I think I will ask, so you were all quizzed by Martina, I believe, to express your choices in the committees that will put together the next annual report. We have the results of that. I put together a little chart which takes that information and makes it a little easier for my old eyes. So if Martina can share that, or there we go. Perfect. So there was kind of a miracle occurred as far as I was concerned, because it's quite interesting that of the 9 people who were, or the 8 people who replied, we broke down perfectly evenly in our first and second choices. I don't know what the odds of that are. But if we down at the bottom there, I put together what committees would look like if they were made up of people who had first and second choices. And I'm wondering if the group thinks that a committee of 2 can in most cases accomplish this work. And by the way, that report writing, and it probably really should say report editing, because the sections of the report will really get written by each group, and then the report editing committee will put it all together. And that report editing will actually be happening after the others. So Lucy and I, who had that as our first choice, we wouldn't be doing 2 committees at one time. We would actually be doing these sequentially. But I'm wondering your thoughts on whether 2 people can do the work of each of these committees, or do we need 3 or 4 people? Your thoughts. Don't all talk at once.
Well, and with the screen share, Pat, you may not see the hands up, so I'll give you a hand with that.
Okay.
So Larry Minikis followed by Larry Chu have their virtual hands up.
Right. I was just going to say that the minimum a committee could have is 2. So I think we can all agree on that. 3 is probably ideal, and we all have a number 2, and we could do that optionally, not necessarily required. 1 committee is required, the second one is optional, and so some committees may end up with 2, and some may end up with 3, and some may end up with 4. If someone in the number 3 says, yeah, I really want to be on report writing, for example. So that would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, and Larry Chu, I know you only put 1 choice, so your thoughts.
I only put 1 choice only because, between John and myself, that was almost a foregone conclusion. I was able to do the work myself last year because we don't have that many transactions. So it's easy to do. But I would encourage, at least in the finance committee, if other people up to 4 want to be involved with it, it's a good learning experience. Particularly anyone who's going on beyond the next 2 years, because my second term ends in 2 years. So there does need to be, some transition there. I think the work plan, that seems like there's a lot of work involved in that when you consider how many projects needed to be reviewed. Probably the transparency does not need that many people to it the most, unless other people want to be involved in it. And I left it open really for myself to assist with any of the report writing, although I wasn't on that committee because, part of that report involved the finance report. I effectively was a part of that, but not part of the discussion.
Okay. Jennifer?
I just want to say, I don't know what possessed me to put finance as number 2, because I think I have a lot to learn and not a whole lot to offer.
Does
So,
anyone notice that finance got 4 4s?
I being one of them.
I wonder why. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, John.
Well, if Jennifer, well, how anybody else have any thoughts or comments on sharing out this workload?
And John McCauley has his hand up, Pat.
Oh, okay, John.
Yeah, I was just going to say, look, I've never done this. I have no idea what any of this entails. So I'm actually just going to rely on whatever you guys suggest, but I'm certainly happy to work with Larry on finance.
Well,
And Kingston's not here, but I have as the cost member, I have a strong feeling that he would volunteer to be on finance were he here. So I'm not speaking for him, of course. I'm just, I believe he will be.
well, it's interesting, too. One of the other kind of slight miracles is that for finance and transparency, someone who did it last year is put it as a first choice, so that there's an old hand there. And because I am, my first choice is the report editing, I'm not doubling up on effort, so I don't mind being the old head on the work plan. So do we want to just leave it where it's a committee of 4, and if you're 1 or 2, if you had it as a first choice, you definitely need to be participating. But if you had it as a second choice, you have a little bit more option. Does that make sense?
Right. I would say yes, Pat.
Okay. And one thing to point out, and this is going to become a little important when we look at the next item. There are 3 people who will be going off in January. I don't know if those 3 people want to apply again, but I think except for the report editing, the hope is that we get all this work done this fall. But the 3 people that I believe drew the middle straw when we were drawing straws are Larry Menike's, Rebecca, and Kingston. So they may not be here for the report editing, if that makes sense. John, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm happy to really concentrate on finance and not participate in work plan if that helps out.
Okay. There may be some things that we draw on your expertise for, however, and I think that's one thing to know in general is if there's expertise around, we can draw on it for. So if I am not sure if,
Pat,
yeah,
I should have put report writing or editing as number 2. So if it turns out that that's needed when come
okay,
January, I'd be happy to participate in that.
okay, so okay, so we will
Can I make a motion to accept the chart with the one change that Jennifer suggested? And
okay.
that's my motion.
I'd second that.
Martina,
Okie dokie.
I'm not sure that the public will care, but
Oh, I apologize. If there are any members of the public wishing to speak at this time, please unmute yourself or please raise your hands in the Reactions, if you're joining us by phone, please raise your hand by pressing *9. And I do not believe we have any public comments.
Okay, so we've got I guess, does
Roll
this
call time.
require a vote?
Yes, it does, since the bylaws do not allow for the chair to appoint a committee
Okay,
or ad hoc subcommittee with the way you guys wrote the bylaw, so it does require a vote.
okay. So with the change of Jennifer possibly moving to the report writing,
Ready?
and John possibly moving off of the work plan.
Although I'm glad to be available
Okay,
if anybody wants me.
okay. So someone had made a motion and I've forgotten who.
That was me.
Larry
Okay,
motioned, I seconded, so it's just time to do a roll call.
okay, great.
Okay, Member Cole is absent. Member Chu,
Aye.
Member Dilworth,
Aye.
Member Menegis,
Aye.
Member Macaulay,
Aye.
Member Wara is absent, Member Howard,
Aye.
and Member Randolph.
Aye.
And Chair Suggs is also absent. Looks like we have unanimous vote by all in attendance.
And I note that Michael Wara did not respond to this, and I've already talked to Martina about it, so he may get added to something. Okay, Martina, if you can now move to item C and bring up, this is sort of the calendar that a small committee worked on. And that's just the one that you had in initially. It's not one I created. It's the one that's in the agenda.
Pat, could I move that we accept the calendar as it's more like an information item that's just asking us to accept it. So I don't know that there's a need for discussion unless anyone feels otherwise. I would move that we accept it as written.
I think that's fine.
Yeah, Larry, did you have
Yeah, I think from Mark's staff report, we're gonna need to change a little bit of the finance stuff. Doesn't sound like the books are gonna be closed until sometime in October, but if they're done anytime in October, should be able to get it done within, last time I did it in 2 weeks. So it's just sometime in November, but it's not on the critical path of anything. It's just adjusting the dates.
yeah, and one thing I would say that the small group of us who worked on this, we need from this to create a calendar, particularly mentioned by board member Kurtz, to let the various entities know when they can expect information. And it's my understanding, Mark, that you will, or staff will be collecting, like it's mostly work plan information, the completion of projects, the financial information on local projects that we collected this year. Do I understand that correctly? Is you're going to
You
centrally?
do. You
Yeah.
do.
So if with everyone's permission, based on this calendar, we can, the small group of us can work with Mark to have that calendar so all the entities know when they will need to have information ready for us. Does that make sense? Okay, so is that fine that we just accept this calendar as written, and that we will work with Mark on a calendar for the entity so that they'll know when they need to have information to Mark.
I mean, to Larry's comment, I think you should just consider this a working document and keep working
Okay.
with it, and it doesn't have to be set in stone. I don't just, I just think you just get on with it.
Good, good. Thank you. So that then brings us to item D, which I'm going to turn this over to John to discuss this. This was a committee that was initially on last month's agenda. The intent of it was to discuss what those officially monitoring the board or other committees were to be looking for when they were monitoring, and what they were to be reporting back to this committee. And it sort of grew beyond that with a larger discussion. So I'm going to, with that little bit of background, turn it over to John, who will lead discussion of the document that this group, which was made up of
It was Pat, Larry, and I, and Jennifer.
Yeah.
And we met, if I can just jump in. So what we did
Yes,
was
jump in.
we created a straw man. Pat and I wrote a straw man. It was presented to the four of us. We had an extended collegial conversation through several meetings. And as a result of those conversations, some items were changed in terms of, display, and others were changed in terms of policy. So there was some good back and forth. And with that, we came to what you see tonight. It was actually unanimous at the time. It didn't have to be, but it was unanimous. And of course, now that it's had further time to age, any of us can speak up if we want to speak up any further on it. Given that there are 6 members here tonight, and you have to get past 3, you have to get 4 yeses to get something forward. A tie is a no. What I would suggest, if Pat, you're okay with this, in order to be a little more expeditious about this, and knowing that everyone's read all these items, that I would very briefly describe them and then do a quick hey, are there 3 you want to talk about this further, either for deliberative purposes or just because you disagree, and we can concentrate on what we agree on first, get that out of the way, and then proceed with what we want to proceed to discuss further. If that's okay with you, I can fairly quickly move through everything in here. I've gone through it already, and it's comprised of 6 decisions, so I can kind of run you through the 6 decisions if that's okay. Is that okay with you, Pat?
That's perfect.
Okay, so the first item just deals with the overall question about, what is the responsibility in terms of the attendance at the meetings, and what are the goals that are being met there. Pat wrote this actually, and we kicked it around a little bit and thought it made a lot of sense. So it's basically reporting on an exception basis, acknowledging that we get a good explanation already from Mark. So is anyone's negative on that, or we'd like to just move on? Raise your hand if you want to discuss it further. I see 1 hand up. Okay, with only 1 hand up, we would just continue to move on. Then we move into a second section, which involves a series of clarities of terms. In this area, the idea here is that if you're going to ask people to attest to that something complies with measure C, we should all have a pretty direct and solid understanding of what measure C says. We would note that if these matters do move forward, it's not the COC's job to make these definitions. That responsibility should go to the executive officer to mark for consideration into whatever committee it makes sense for. So the real question, although we took a pass at how we would see things, but we're not supposed to be setting policy, we're supposed to be observing. So with that, the first section is the 20% local allocation, where where the members must certify it to a higher level of service. That's a requirement specifically of the measure, and it's interesting that's the only section of the 3 categories of expenditure that has that specific requirement. for a higher level of service. So the question is, what's a higher level of service mean? And we kicked this around a little bit, and we were concerned that there's situations where, just as an example, if you're a group and you've got people that can do more vegetation management with your same headcount, you can say, well, we have a higher level of service, but then they could use that money for other purposes. And we had a concern that that's really not the best way to move forward from the perspective of the voter. So we've come up with a proposal that says that the higher level of service could include a requirement that the service be based on specifically spending the funds directly, that's the important word, on the expansion of service, rather than just expanding the service with existing staff and using the funds for other purposes. Incremental cost to supervise local projects should consider the guidance below on overhead, which we'll get into in a minute. So that's kind of where we felt on that. Again, we would suggest that we don't come up with the final definition, but I think there's enough there to get the point that we think that if you got that money for local service, it should be actually expended on those services. So is there anyone opposed to that category? Okay, seeing no hands up, I think we move on to that one. So we're now 2 down, 4 to go. Third one is with regards to the 60% allocation. It can be cross-jurisdictional, or it can be with a single jurisdiction. Although the requirement for it being incremental to existing efforts is not specific within the ordinance, it does say that the core functions of the authority are being served. And I think we have, as a group, felt that that means that the taxpayers expect that this incremental Measure C tax is indeed for incremental service. So again, similar language we prepared, suggesting that the existing local services should be reimbursed only when the service is based on specifically spending the 60% core funds on the expansion of service, rather than just expanding staff with services with existing staff. It's the same as what we just talked about. So are there people concerned about that? Raise your hand. Okay, so that seems to move forward. Thank you. Okay, the next one deals with, let's see here. Oh yeah, for defensible space. On the defensible space area, we started down that same path to say whether it should be incremental or not. And what the 4 of us concluded was, we talked about it a fair amount. And what the 4 of us concluded was that that would be unfairly burdened districts that already had very mature programs in place to take care of inspections. And since the voters across the district know what the inspection levels were within each of their districts, and because they voted yes on a topic that indicates that 20% of the money should be used for that, we felt that it was okay if your jurisdiction had a mature inspection program, that the money just be given to the group to do their inspections, as long as 100% of the money is spent on inspection and on inspection activity, but not have to have this measure that it's an incremental level of service. So that's where we ended up on that one. We kicked that around a bit. Is there anyone who is opposed to that or wants to discuss that further? Okay, we're moving along. Next one is administrative costs. What are administrative costs? And we felt that administrative costs should be defined as any cost not directly attributable to a core local or inspection effort. Under this definition, local jurisdictions would not be reimbursed for any allocation of existing employee effort to monitor a project's execution. The idea there is, if you've got one chief, that chief is going to spend their whole year doing stuff in their district. And if you're going to allocate some of their costs to these 3 elements that they could potentially be working on, you're not going to have 1.2 chiefs. You're just going to have 1 chief. So we felt that under the idea that we're trying to ensure that administrative costs, which have a limit at 10%, should be defined broadly, and that direct should be interpreted narrowly. It's kind of the idea that it really should be a direct activity. And if it's not a direct activity, it should be considered a overhead item, overhead item. So that's where we ended up on that. Hope I explained that well. How do you guys feel about that one? Are there anyone who wants to discuss that any further? Okay, that seems like there's nothing there. The last section is all kind of the same idea, and this is with regards to as to the question of oversight. And the idea here is that the organization is maturing, and while it was understandable in its early years that there's a lot of involvement of COC in not just assessing things, we were actually creating COCs was creating controls, as I understand it, and really the way these things should work under a normal environment with a decent control environment is that MWPA would on their own make a determination that the 60% is being spent properly and the 220s are being spent properly, and that COC wouldn't have to come in and do that. We would rather look over MWPA's shoulder when they've completed their own processes. And that's a shift. I would assume that can't be done this year because it's kind of like you're coming to the end of it now. But as there has been some improvements in the process, we can certainly give feedback as to the COC view, the adequacy prospectively with regards to building controls into the organization rather than belting them on through COC. There's language in each of the three categories, but essentially it's the same idea for all three. So that's the idea there. Just wanted to see how you felt about that. Is there anyone who wants to digest that any further? Raise your hand. Okay, well, that worked out okay. We went through that. We did work pretty hard on it within the four of us, but I'm glad to see. And of course, if anyone had any concerns about it, we would have welcomed any comments, but it looks like you guys are in line with us on that. The only other thing we just noted was that COC members should avoid providing contemporaneous feedback on decisions the other committees are making, as this would interfere with COC independence from the process of management, because you can't assess what you perform. So that's it in a nutshell. Sounds like there's consensus around this, and the next step would be to move it forward to Mark. I don't think we'd have to rewrite this in any way. I think you've got it, and just go ahead and proceed. So I guess, Pat, we would want to get public comment and then take a vote, since we've already kind of semi-voted on each of the individual items.
So
Larry has his hand raised.
yeah, Larry has, do you have a question, Larry?
You didn't ask about questions on your last comment about contemporaneous comments being made during the meeting.
Oh, right.
It says should avoid, when our operating policies are really to not be speaking at public meetings until we come back to the COC. So
well, that's within policy. I'm sorry, if that's already within policy, then perhaps I suggest we just kill that paragraph if it's already been dealt with previously.
we can do that since it's already written in our operating procedures.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay.
That makes sense to me. And that seems like if it's repetitive and not quite as precise as what was there before, let's just kill it.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
Larry.
I just want to offer the most minor corrections. The first paragraph, last word, over, just the spelling of oversight, very minor.
Oh,
It happened. I do.
Pat and I looked at that so many times and we missed that.
No, it's well written. If there's only one thing that any of us found, John, congratulations.
So I'll turn this back around, delete that one paragraph, catch that one spelling thing, and Mark, you'll get it tomorrow, and then go ahead and move it forward, presuming that, I guess we've already voted on each of the items, but take public comment and then do a final vote to accept it. Does that make sense?
well, just in the interest of everyone getting a chance to comment, Lucy, did you have something that you wanted to say?
The only question that I had was on the item 1, which seems to suggest that the oversight role would always be in person, or was that?
Well, and that brings up a question, and the next thing on the list is one more document to look at. But in our discussions in the committee, it seems that people think there is a value in the being in person because it is a physical awareness that we are there and we are overseeing. I think we may need to take a look at bylaws and what we originally said in the bylaws. And when we, maybe if that was your only question, let's, I think, we need a vote on this, don't we? To accept this, Mark?
I guess we will need a vote, right? I assume.
And
because-
do we need to go out to public comment too?
We would go
Correct.
to public comment first, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so if there are any members of the public wishing to speak on this item, please notify us by raising your hands in the reactions. And there are no public comments at this time.
Okay, any further discussion? And then I think we'll take a vote and then we'll look at, yeah, Lucy?
So I think it's not specified in the bylaws as to whether it would be in person or remotely. I would submit that we present it as a preference, but not a hard and fast rule. Sometimes it just might be impossible for somebody who's designated to be the the oversight person to actually be there in person.
I can make that amendment to the document if there's agreement across that.
Okay, well, let's go ahead then. And Larry, you had one more comment?
Oh, no, I was gonna say, I would support Lucy's comment. I mean, I have a day job. I can certainly break away and attend meetings virtually, for the most part all the time. But sometimes it may be challenging to physically be there in person.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of there are really 5 meetings and except for 2 of those committees, they don't happen regularly. And that I was going to suggest that the people who are monitoring each committee check among themselves, but if nobody feels that it's absolutely necessary that somebody be there in person, then that's an unnecessary step. Jennifer?
If you just take the word in person off, it still is a good sentence with attendance at these meetings, and then we're not specifying.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
So just to make sure that I get this right, a designated monitor from the COC should continue to attend meetings. And what's the edit you want to make? Observe? What was the edit? I want to make sure I got it right.
Well, Jennifer, you're muted.
Sorry. Paragraph 4, if you just remove in person and capitalize attendance, it's a good sentence and it's not specifying whether it's remote or in person. I'm assuming.
I'm sorry, I don't read it that way. I have on the document, which I printed from what we sent, a designated monitor from the COC should continue to attend meetings of the board of directors and its executive and finance committees and operating committees and the advisory technical committees. Oh, in-person attendance. Oh, okay. I got you. Thank you. I got it. So you want me to delete the word in person?
Correct.
Okay. And if you're not, attendance usually means you're there. So.
But in this day and age, we're attending everything virtually. And so
That's why
I'm not even
I'm
sure.
just puzzled because there's no there, right? So I thought we were talking about.
I thought the confusion came from it being in person. Is that what the confusion is about this in
I
this
think the confusion
conversation?
is about whether you observe it by being on the Zoom call or by reviewing the Zoom call after. Is that what we're talking about, Larry?
Oh, that's not what I understood. Because if you are reviewing it at a later time, it's not providing evidence of our participation, which I thought was
The
what we were
gravitas of us being
suggesting.
there, exactly. right.
Yeah, at least one of us. I think we all agree, well, we, in our committee, we agreed that that was important.
Well, I think we can work out the technicalities of this. I continue to think at least one person monitoring in person is the preference. And that doesn't mean that Larry Chu has to ever attend a meeting in person. I think there are enough of us where we can work it out. That's a little bit of a technicality that I think we can work out. Yes, Larry Menekes?
I think we're just saying, we're not trying to compel people that they must be there live. I think that's all we're trying to say here.
Okay.
It's helpful, but we're not compelling anyone.
And I
How
think
about, if I may make a suggestion, that last line, the one that Jennifer brought forward, in-person attendance at these meetings is preferred and provides. So it gives you some
Right.
flexibility if is not, if you don't make it.
Yeah, that's real clean.
that's good.
Okay, so I've got that one. And sorry, Larry, what was that typo in the first paragraph? I couldn't find it. I was going a little fast.
Oh, the first paragraph, last word. Oversight, SITE. Do you not see it there?
Well, I've got it spelled as SITE, isn't that correct?
No,
No.
SIGHT.
Oh, okay, so I don't know how to spell.
No, you have it right throughout the document. It's the one instance.
Oh, okay, all right. More numbers than words. Okay, I got you.
I even did a dictionary on it and it doesn't exist as a word.
All right, now I've got it. Okay, good. All right.
Okay, let's have a vote then to accept this.
Well, I don't think you can make the motion, Pat. You've got to ask,
Yes, so it can.
I would make a motion that
someone-
we accept this report with the two minor edits, with being spelling oversight correctly, and then clarifying that it's just a preference to attend meetings, but not required.
I second the motion.
Martina,
Absolutely. Member Cole. Absent. Member Chu.
Aye.
Member Dilworth.
Aye.
Member Menekes.
Aye.
Member Macaulay.
Aye.
Member Wara is absent. Member Howard.
Aye.
Member Randolph.
aye.
And Chair Suggs is absent for a unanimous vote by all in attendance.
Okay, and then we just have one thing left to, one document to look at very quickly. And I think, Martina, if you can put up the one I sent you that has the lines in it that is in, I forget what it's entitled, a committee monitoring. And everybody can take a look at this for a moment. My old eyes don't work well. So this is what I'm not quite sure how this information was gathered. And John, you have your hand up. So you probably are seeing something wrong with it right away.
Well, I just wanted to make the point that we just made a conclusion, because it was careful on our subcommittee that there would be a designated monitor, which means one person. So we have lots of people on all these meetings, and don't we really want to take another look at that? Because I think we just decided that we only need to have one person there as the organization has matured.
Well, I would suggest that one person be the primary, the person who's going to try to be there in person each time, and that the others are going to at some point or another watch it, and I'm not quite sure how this list was developed. Jennifer.
In previous discussions, what we talked about doing was that the members that were assigned to particular committees would talk ahead of time and decide who was going to go. I've never done that, but it would make sense that we could rotate, because there aren't enough of these committees for each of us to take one role. Did that make sense? I'm sorry if I'm not speaking clearly, but we could actually talk to each other before a meeting, and somebody could say, I'm going to be there.
And that's what has been, in my experience, somewhat happening. And I thought everybody was doing it, but maybe that's an unnecessary step if someone is the primary. John, did you have a suggestion?
Well, yeah, I was told I had to check 3 boxes, so that's why I checked 3 boxes.
Yeah.
That's how my information was provided. But, to what Jennifer was saying, I mean, and what you said, to me, I just might suggest that there'd be a primary and a secondary in each committee, and that then we know who that is, and you will have fewer committees that you're either the primary or the secondary on, since there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 committees and 9 of us, whatever that math works out to be, and then do it on that basis. So there's more responsibility to those 2 parties to work things out, and then leave it at that. And then if, then maybe give us another chance to look at how these were assigned or volunteered for, and see how it lays out. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. I would suggest that the reason you were told to put down 3 is I think the bylaws, and I was surprised at that when I looked back at them, said everybody would opt for 3 meetings, and maybe we were just trying to make sure that everybody had some things, but I like the idea of having a primary and a secondary.
Well, we just passed a minute ago the concept of, having a designated monitor. So
Yeah.
that would just, I assume you would update the bylaws for that change, Mark, right? Based on,
Yes.
yeah.
But
Larry,
the committee would have to agree to the change of the bylaws.
Right.
and we could bring that back next time.
Like as a consent item, right? So,
Yeah, and Larry, not to interrupt with your hand, but I can shed light on how this table was created, and that was after we've had meetings where we've discussed the monitoring assignments, and we've been avoiding the term, calling them committees, so that an ad hoc subcommittee has to have a specific task and an endpoint and a beginning point, or beginning point, endpoint. And so this really isn't an ad hoc subcommittee. These are monitoring assignments. So we've been careful to call them monitoring assignments, and therefore they also don't require a vote from the committee for this. So these monitoring assignments were based on solicitations following meetings where we said, all right, let's update the assignments.
So Larry Menekes.
I don't know if I missed something or someone missed me, but I should have some X's in there.
Yeah, and Larry, I think that's an artifact from when you were the original chair. You just said, I'm going to them all. So
Yeah, I was wondering if it was that
yeah,
artifact.
that's what it is.
Okay.
Can we, I like the idea of having a primary and a secondary, and there's nothing that stops anybody from going to any meeting they want to. Help me out here, Mark. What do we need to do to, I like the idea of having a primary and a secondary. But what do we?
I might
do to
suggest
get
that
there?
because you could go around and around and around on this, that maybe Mark can work with us individually and line something up that works, because he can see all the tea leaves, particularly since it's being sensitive to the whole subcommittee commentary he's just made. Couldn't Mark just deal with it and
It's yeah, especially since this, John, like you pointed out, this is not a voting thing. So I think we can, Martina and I can get the solicitations from you all and solicit whether or not you're willing to be one of the primary or the alternate, and then we can bring it back to the next COC meeting.
Sounds perfect.
You know, it's a little confusing because we mark it as an action item, but it's really not an action item. So I think we have to be careful on how we do the agenda, because I'm confused now. I don't know whether we should vote or say that we're going to delay a vote to next month, or it's just not an item we vote on at all. So I might suggest for the next month, we move it as an information item.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, agreed.
okay. Solved.
Okay. Then I think we are, so I think we're down to committee members' requests regarding future agenda items. I think you can, Martina, you can take that down for now.
And we do have Larry Chu with a raised hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, Larry.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to go back to number 9 for a moment. I think the reason why we made it an action item and you don't have to take an action is if somebody reports back to the COC full committee and there's something that we want to have that representative address their respective monitoring assignment on. So if I report out on the finance committee and we decide we want to take a message or a recommendation back to the finance committee, that message had to be pre-approved by the COC before me as the representative can go back to their next meeting.
Well, Larry, if we just, I get your point. If we just previously said that this would be an exception-based reporting process, I think that's what we said prospectively. Could it just be, if you have an exception base, then at that time, it would be agendized as you suggest as an action item. And then otherwise, there really doesn't need to be one because we are only going to report on an exception basis. That's what we agreed to, right?
Yeah, I guess we can handle it that way as well. Yeah, whoever then has something that they want the CO's full committee to consider, they would have to give that to Mark before the posting of the agenda.
Right, right. It's like Parliament.
Yeah.
Okay. So are we now ready for, anyone have future agenda items that they would like to have addressed? Okay. Then I think we are ready to move to adjournment. Is that correct? And we now have
is.
0 attendees, so.
I move we adjourn.
I will second that motion.
So can we all do this by hand? Or?
Actually, we don't even have to have a motion. We can
Right,
just.
we're just done.
My hand is pushing the leave button.
Right, exactly.
Well,
Congratulations on your first meeting, Pat.
Good evening, all.
Thank you,
Well,
Pat.